Are you willing to accept Christ's invitation to know Him more intimately, love Him more intensely, and follow Him more closely, and then go out into the world and live His good news? If you say yes, then you could be the 13th apostle. Join Dan Duddy and Tom Caffrey, the odd couple of Catholic radio, as they ride the radio waves 2 by 2 to share the goodness, beauty, and truth of Jesus Christ and His church. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the 13th apostle.
In our material scientific world, people so often deride and dismiss stories, narratives, and especially tall, that is false, tales, often referring to them as mere myths. But the Good Samaritan is a myth, as is the prodigal son and the rich man and Lazarus. So I wonder how the materialist and scientist could reasonably say that mercy, generosity, remorse, humility, forgiveness, and love are not true. A myth is a vehicle for truth. Enduring stories and the imaginative mind they train, and the careful ear they cultivate are the means by which cultures throughout human history have taught members of each generation how best to live a good life, especially when humanity faces, well, inhumanity, as well as the travails of every life. Welcome back, friends, to another episode of the 13th Apostle, where we explore the good, beautiful, and true of the Catholic faith and our church. This is Tom Caffrey, going solo once again, but doing so while carrying the flag with much gratitude. Joining you today, is E.P. Cowley, author of Tales From Wakken Wood, a work of fantasy from Ignatius Press and provided to us by our friend, publicist Susan Nutt. However, like Jesus' parables, this story is one filled with truth. E.P., welcome to the 13th Apostle.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Wonderful. So before we delve into your book, only the second work of fiction discussed on the show after David Penault's wonderful fantasy, Earth, Dragon, Run, please tell the audience about yourself and then give an abridged summary of your book, abridged only to avoid spoiling the ending and the many wonders that lead up to the conclusion.
All right. Thank you. My name is E.P. Cowley, or Edie Cowley, Mrs. Cowley. I'm a retired homeschool mom, meaning that my 2 kids have grown up and flown the nest. I live in BC in Canada. This book, it takes place in the woods, and I live near the woods and have lived near the woods for a while. Specifically the woods of the Pacific Northwest. And here in the area around Vancouver, it's actually a temperate rainforest. So it's filled with moss of so many different colors, all kinds of different creatures. Recently, I've been traveling north of Vancouver into the mountains to a valley called the Pemberton Meadows, where the trumpeter swans just flew in. And so I love nature and I see God in nature. And so this book was written within my own wonder in the things around me. So this book is about 2 children, Peter and Pixel. They are 12 years old, going on 13. And Peter has an unusual birthmark. His irises are silver, like mirrors. They reflect the light. Both of them live in the city of Lang. Pixel, his friend, she's a tough kid from a tough family. She ends up needing blood treatments on an unknown island where her extended family live. And meanwhile, Peter is sent to this island as well because he's being beat up by bullies. So both the children end up on this island for different reasons. And once they're there, hidden enemies emerge who threaten their lives, and it launches them into these strange adventures in the forest called Wakken Wood. But the children are aided by mythical creatures and a mysterious woman who offers them guidance. And that is the beginning of lots of different fairy tales we read. The heroes go off into the woods.
They certainly do. And, one of the things you just said about the woman helping in Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, Joseph Campbell, the mythographer, and in the hero's journey, not just him, but he wrote about it probably more than anybody. The woman is portrayed as the temptress, a stumbling block. I think it's one of the things I thought about with your work is this is kind of like, okay, different take on however, I've read quite a bit about Campbell's work, but I didn't see a lot in there where the feminine is righteous. It was always portrayed as a stumbling block. In that specific hero's journey, the steps that he put, the monomyth, the good witch and the evil witch. So I think that, I mean, Peter, can we say something about Peter's parents?
Sure. Yeah, his parents have kind of had a rough ride. So their first son, at the opening of the story, their first son has been dead for a couple of years, maybe 4 years. And the mother has slipped into depression. The father has lost his job, and he's as a professor at a university, and he's working at an all-night diner. And the family has, as Peter says, slipped into the real world.
Mm,
And the city of Lang is just a gray place, like so many of our cities have become, kind of the degradation of the way our cities can become, right? As materialists, we build them and we inhabit them and we turn them gray.
that's so well said. And immediately as you're talking about that, I was thinking of Roger Scruton, who wrote so well on the subject of beauty and in architecture and whatnot, and wrote quite forcefully about the grayness of our cities, the uninspiring architecture. People don't go there to take photos of the gray buildings, right? I mean, I've been to a number of beautiful places, and yeah, some of those buildings are gray, but it's not an uninspiring gray. It's a gray from centuries, and the design, the architecture is beautiful. It's just grayish a little bit from the elements, but it's like, humans whose hair starts to go gray, they can still be beautiful even with that, right? I'm speaking only of personal experience. Um,
I'll agree only from personal experience.
so I think that when I read the beginning and I thought, wow, he's starting out in a rough way. There's a different kind of postpartum depression for his mother with the, permanent, although not in our belief system, but still in his life is a permanent loss of her son. So that's a tough start. We won't talk much more about that. In my intro, I referred to each generation passing on the spiritual moral truths, not each member of each generation. So to illustrate my point, I teach college students basic theology, biblical exegesis, and OCIA, Order of Christian Initiation for adults. And their lack of knowledge about Christianity and how it permeates the cultures of Western civilization and how it influenced the world greatly frustrates me. And by Christianity, I'm referring to its doctrines, yes, but more importantly to the person of Christ and how he has inspired the humanities and arts. Think of Mozart and E.P. Cowley. But I don't blame the students. They have not been taught by the preceding generation. For decades, the humanities have been de-emphasized in school, and the arts have often been cut by the budget acts. Educational leaders seem so focused on having their students study STEM courses and only getting a job. But it seems that each day I come across another article about how AI will replace humans in this field or that. Just either yesterday or this morning, I was reading about stockbrokers are going to be a thing of the past. It used to be where if you were, it used to be 6 months ago, if you were a computer coder, you were set. And now there's a glut of coders because of AI. So if people aren't taught how to be human, how to understand the good, beautiful, and true of life, then how will they respond to the great questions of who am I, what is my purpose, and how best can I fulfill that purpose? So, EP, please share your thoughts about this problem and how your book and Christian fantasy in general offers readers a way to respond to that problem.
Yeah, I right away think of G.K. Chesterton's lament for the loss of the fairy tale, or I guess the fairy tale getting relegated to the nursery or the attic. And the fairy tale, which is where Wakken Wood fits, the fairy tale is this vehicle where we learn about the unknown through the known. And I think Aquinas said, I agree with Chesterton that if children aren't reading fairy tales, and I'm not talking about Disney here, I'm talking about the real tales like Grimm's. There are cultures around the world who have these collections of fairy tales. Wakken Wood is based, the creatures are based on Manx fairy tales. But the thing about fairy tales is they teach virtue, and they teach that a person, through the acting out of virtue, can actually make a difference in their world. For example, everybody knows the tale of Beauty and the Beast, the general outline of the tale. Okay, so in a fairy tale, there's always a taboo, almost always a taboo, which means something that if you do this, you won't survive, or you won't win, and you may even be killed. Sleeping Beauty's father breaks a taboo. He picks a rose, and she's punished for it. So she goes to the castle and she has to live with the monster. But in the end, it is through her virtue and her faithfulness that the monster is turned into a prince. Everyone lives happily ever after. So this is just one example. There are so many in the world of fairy tales. I'm thinking of a tale called King Thrushbeard, in which a princess is so proud that she won't marry any of the many suitors who come to the castle. She's critical of all of them. None of them are good enough. Her father gets frustrated. He says, fine, the next man who comes to the castle, you have to marry him. So a beggar appears. She marries the beggar. The beggar takes her off to a little hovel where she has to learn housework. She's pathetic at it because she's been this pampered princess. Over the years that pass, or however much time passes, you are never really sure in a fairy tale. She learns how to do housework. She learns virtue through hardship. And towards the end of the tale, when it's clear that she has been transformed, her character has been transformed, the beggar turns out to be a king, King Thrushbeard, and he takes her to his castle. They live happily ever after. So when I read fairy tales like this, I see so much of the divine in them. I mean, you can see in, for instance, the transformation of this princess. You can see how God handles us. We suffer hardships, but they are for the building of our character, for our transformation. So I think that the loss of fairy tale, I've strayed from your question, but the loss of fairy tales and
You're in the woods. Go ahead.
I'm in the woods, but tales that teach virtue, the loss of them kind of leads to a poverty of heart in students. So I've also encountered young students who they have nothing but internet and games and schoolwork. In creative writing classes, it's difficult to get them to sort of go because their imaginations, that muscle is unused. So we have to do sort of imaginary jumping jacks first to get going before they can even start writing. I think that it's not that they've lost that capacity for wonder and they've lost the ability to want enchantment. It's that it's buried. It's buried under kind of the garbage of pop culture.
It is. It's like you referred to the muscle. If you're on a diet of just sugar, TikTok and whatnot, there's no need for that deep thought. And my concern is, you led me to this thought just with your response there, that when you talked about doing the jumping jacks and whatnot, anything, meet them where they are, right? But then you don't stay there with them, and which is what a good teacher, how a good teacher should teach. You always meet students where they are in the beginning of the year, but you don't keep them where they are. And that's one of my concerns about the educational process now. And when you see the statistics of how many students, especially males, who drop out after not even 2 years, they have 2 years of student loan debt, and they don't even have an associate's degree. There's a major problem. I think imagination is not there. Again, if you're used to having all this stimulus from the videos, you don't have a need. In your boredom, you use your imagination to try to get out of that boredom, and a lot of them don't have that. And again, that's our fault. It's the fault of the generation that's supposed to teach them. In the context of Celtic spirituality, pagan and then Christian, do you think? I don't know whether you're familiar with the concept, and you may be very well familiar with the concept of a thin place. Is Wakken Wood a thin place? And so a thin place for our audience is it's a place where, let's say, the thinnest of membranes or veils or something separates us. I don't even want to say the word separate, but maybe hides us. I think you used the word hide, hides us from the divine and ultimately from God. So talk a little bit about Wakken Wood in that context of a thin place. And you said you learn about God in nature, which is what we're talking about with pagan spirituality. Nature was their cathedral.
Well, now we come to the sacraments. So I'm a Catholic. And so Wakken Wood is part of my interior space, and it is not a thin place. It's a borderland. And in the same way that Mass is a borderland, we drive We park our cars, we walk into the borderland, and we meet God there. And we're told, and I believe it, that we see him in the host. We meet God there and we go home again. And but we're transformed in that borderland, in that, the altar's part of the borderland. And so that's how I think of Wakken Wood, not so much in the thin place idea. I know what you mean by this. I see Wakken Wood as and the island as the place between the city and what in the book is referred to as the inner mountains, which is the final destination for the characters in the book who want to go there. I don't want to say too much more.
Exactly. Yeah, I like your restraint. I mean, I think a little bit about Dante and the Divine Comedy, and it's not unique to him and walking into the dark wood, pretty much the opening line of the Divine Comedy in the Inferno, but ending up in the mountain, with the Paradiso. And so it's, we're talking centuries ago, but so we were talking centuries ago with, again, the pagan. And I don't say pagan in a disparaging way. They had some framework for honoring the creator, and it took people like Patrick and Columba, Bridget, to tell them what you just told us about the sacraments and about the Eucharist. And okay, well, what we believe and what we have is not, we have because it's a gift. It's not a thin place. It's the real presence is there. As you said, we're meeting God. We're consuming God. We know that, and as Patrick is hammering this point that this is who you can become. And the challenge for a lot of people is that you got to be willing, as a friend of mine said years ago in a men's group that I run, help run, you got to be willing to change your life. To be a Christian, you got to change your life. You got to be open to being changed. And I got the impression from Peter and Pixel that they, not right away, a good story wouldn't make it right away, we're open to being changed. If you're unhappy, especially as a child, you just know intuitively, well, I don't want this unhappiness anymore, this pain. But to whom or to what do I open myself so I can either escape that pain or understand it in a different way, but still have some joy in my life? So that's my thinking a little bit with Peter and Pixel.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that, well, maybe like many young people today, they're not sure what that change could be. They're both from the Gray City and they've had tough lives, and they're not sure what change would look like. They have no idea. And so they have to go to a remote place, I think, to experience it. The thing about I think about fairy tale and about a lot of fantasy is that it takes readers certainly on a journey through the pages, but also it's an interior journey. And so if you read a book with a certain amount of openness, even a small bit of openness, well, what's it called? The willing suspension of disbelief, right?
Ah,
That's the way you read fiction. So if you read with that, the willing suspension of disbelief, then a story can take you on an inner pilgrimage. You walk there with characters, you experience their disappointments, you experience their terror, and you can experience the consolation of the happy ending. And I think that's Peter and Pixel, that's what they do. So in the story, their transformation, I think, comes through, well, the transformation that you see comes through particular people, but they're led there through these really mythical creatures that are quite fun and kind of endearing, but they're not, those mythical creatures aren't sort of the end point. Those creatures kind of lead Peter and Pixel towards the figures in the story who offer them real hope and a real chance for change. I'm not sure that makes sense. Maybe you have to have read the story.
no, I thought it, and I'm a little, maybe I'm certainly influenced by reading the story, but I thought it made sense. I love the idea of what you said about an inner pilgrimage for several reasons. From a personal standpoint, just before we started this program today, you and I got a video call from my son who is in the Isle of Orkney. He's doing a 6 or maybe 8 month pilgrimage. He started at the top of the Shetland Islands, and this is not his first pilgrimage. And you can't be, and I can't think of a story, uh, fairy tale or nonfiction, where a person is not changed from the experience. again, you're like the teacher, we could say, loosely, the characters that help Peter and Pixel. They're kind of like, well, we could use the word influencer, but not using the
Yeah.
lingo of today, right? They, they're teachers, they're influencers, but in a good way. And I'm just really going a little wild with my imagination, my Catholic imagination, to say, okay, well, they might not be. Are they part of this communion of saints that help these children along their pilgrimage? So I don't know. I just find I thought of, there's a character in Harry Potter, Dobby the house elf, and he was enslaved, but Harry kind of tricked the bad wizard and emancipated Dobby. And so Dobby went on his journey of heroism. On one hand, it didn't have a good ending, but it did have a good ending. And so I see there's so much, part of the difficulty, that's not difficulty. It was a great challenge in a way to staying with certain parts of your stories. I was getting so excited about, all these things were coming to my head about as I'm reading your story. I, everything that I've mentioned, with Dante and Harry Potter. I know you were influenced by, and I wouldn't have to have read anything to know that you were influenced by Tolkien and others. Uh, and I just think, that is great. You're carrying on a tradition. You are a storyteller. I mean, I've told many stories to my children over the years. They didn't last X number of pages as your story did. And so it's like a font of just being stimulated and saying, okay, wow, what to just stay focused on the thread that's there. So it was not a problem. It was really a beautiful experience. We only have, let's see, what are we doing with so we've got a few minutes left. Did you have a favorite? Do you have a favorite character?
Oh, in Wakken Wood?
And are
Hmm.
you in Wakken Wood?
I'm back in Wakken Wood. I can say that. I had to leave for a while. Just I'm back in. The Poinkers mean a lot to me. So the Arkansoni. I think because they're a little bit sassy. I like their music. I like their style. Yeah, but also there's the other Manx creatures, the Bagaines. Lately I've realized that Tom Spider is one of my favorites as well. I tend to let spiders live around my house now inside. So
I can't wait for my daughter
Tom's
to hear this episode.
well, Tom Spider has his influence. So yes, I mean so
Uh, right.
I do like the Manx mythical creatures. And I had a lot of fun adventuring with them along the way. And they're the reason I never knew what was going to happen next. I'd
Okay, now
turn the
hold on.
page with my pen. Yeah.
I go, hold on. You've mentioned Manx three times. I want you
Okay.
to, I want you to expand upon who are the Manx, and so tell our audience about that, about
Oh,
them,
of course. Yes.
please.
Manx is shorthand for people who are from the Isle of Man. The Isle of Man sits between Ireland and Great Britain, or England, in the Irish Sea. And they have their own currency, they have their own language called Manx, and they have this distinct brand of mythology. So it's an offshoot of probably Irish mythology. There are different links with it, but I think because it was such an isolated place, its mythology has its own DNA. Something like the Manx cat, which is the tailless cat, has its own little DNA quirk. And so these characters come from that. My husband is a fifth generation Manxman. And so he's traced his ancestry back to this great great grandfather, or maybe more greats than that, who worked on a merchant ship. And when he got to North America, he jumped ship, he crossed the continent and set up a homestead in White Salmon, Washington. So that's my link with the Isle of Man, is my husband's Manxness. So
Is Manx. I like that. So I recommend if you are interested, it's a very basic a book, uh, The Fairy Isle. That's Faerie Isle, Tales and Traditions of Ireland's Forgotten Folklore by Simon Quinn. And it's a very basic, it's really for children, but it really gives a really good idea about Manx, it's really Manx tales. And so the Isle of Man, in that book, the author, references the foundation of the Isle of Man, where there was a giant in Ireland and a giant in Scotland. They had an argument, and the Irish giant reaches down, grabs a big hunk of earth and flings it, but trying to hit the Scottish giant, but it goes over the Scottish giant's head, lands in the middle of the Irish Sea, and there's the the Isle of Man. So, oh my gosh, we have to really, I'm sorry to say, we have to wind this down. I so much to talk about. Uh, just trying to see if there's anything else I can think of before, and there's too many things. So, E.P. Cowley, author of Tales from Wakken Wood. We thank you so much for joining us on the 13th Apostle. It was wonderful.
It's been a real pleasure. Thank you for the good book talk.
Excellent. So stay tuned, friends, for the Angelus, followed by Your Prayer Intentions with Peter and Jemmy. And I'll close with a quote from a character written by E.P. Cowley's favorite master of characterization, Charles Dickens. God bless us, every one. And if you don't know that quote, then reading Tales from Wakken Wood will open your mind to the arts and to works such as A Christmas Carol. Bye-bye, EP. Nice to have met you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to The 13th Apostle with Dan Duddy and Tom Caffrey. For more information on Dan, visit his website at www.danduddy.com or email dcduddy@gmail.com. Tom's website is faithpilgrims.com or email trcaffrey@faithpilgrims.com. How about you? Will you be the 13th Apostle?